A or B?
The unique quality of AI is that it gets better by itself.
Left or right?
Machines don't have judgment, they don't have ethics, they don't have a sense of responsibility.
Yes or no?
Sometimes you have to turn off the autopilot and you have to land the plane yourself.
Welcome to The Art of Deciding with Bruce Whitfield.
Hello, and welcome to The Art of Deciding, the podcast where we try to unravel decision-making and how to do it as effectively as possible. Of course, we live in an age where a lot of what we do can be done better by machines, particularly when you start talking about artificial intelligence. How we use AI in all aspects of our lives, including decision-making, is a topic that is dominating global conversations, particularly when the development of new, more effective AI systems can have huge economic consequences. As we record this, the American tech industry is reeling from the shockwaves of the Chinese AI assistant DeepSeek version 3, knocking ChatGPT off the top spot in the US App Store, causing a knock-on effect in markets all around the world. It was AI's potential to make a huge impact that attracted Mark Purdy to it. Mark is a thought leader who focuses on issues at the intersection of economics, technology, and business. He's written for publications like Harvard Business Review, the Financial Times, China Daily, and Fortune. He got interested in AI a while back, but he wasn't a tech bro. He was an economist, chief economist at a large global organization, in fact. But that's exactly why he needed to know more.
I wanted to understand more about the drivers of economic growth. And when I started looking at AI about 10 years ago, people were talking about machine learning, they were talking about robotics, they were talking about different forms of AI. But it seemed to me that very few people were actually talking about what does it mean for our livelihoods, our jobs, for how we drive growth. So I started looking at it and doing some modeling to say, well, what would happen if we actually did include AI in these growth projections? And it actually made a huge difference to projections of future growth. So that was kind of what led to my interest in it. But then I found I was getting all sorts of additional sort of questions. People say, well, that's great, Mark. It's going to drive economic growth. But well, doesn't that mean that we're all going to lose our jobs, that the robots are going to take over, that the robots are going to be making decisions? And so that kind of led me to consider those questions and think about it not just from an economics perspective, but also think about it from a kind of a sociological perspective as well. What does it mean for us as people, as citizens? What does it mean for the economy? What does it mean for society? You know, these technologies are increasingly powerful. They're going to change our lives, but do we know how they're going to change our lives?
Excellent question. Our favorite statistic on the podcast is that we make around 35,000 decisions a day. At least that's what the internet tells us. We base those decisions on the information that we can gather together. And no one is arguing with the fact that the algorithms that power AI assistants like ChatGPT or Gemini can access and process far more information far more quickly than our brains ever could. So what are we for? Shouldn't we just be letting them make all the decisions?
You know, we always still have to bring the element of human judgment to it. Yes, the algorithm can find lots of information. It can look at all these different variables. It can come up with ideas that humans would not necessarily have thought of. So that's quite important. But ultimately, you are the decision maker. You should be the ultimate decision maker, because even if it's something as mundane as, you know, in an insurance company where they now use AI to look for signs of fraud in applications. So the AI will often pick up anomalous transactions and they'll be flagged. But always there's a human at the end of it who reviews it. I mean, it's never left entirely up to the machine because we just haven't reached that stage yet where the machine is faultless.
So it's about judgment then. And judgment is, at least for now, the one thing that differentiates our cognitive abilities over those of a machine. I might say, Mark, let's go for lunch. I know this lovely place. We don't care what's on the menu. We'll decide when we get there, but we're choosing a place. Now, the algorithm isn't going to have that conversation. In the same way as the meeting in the boardroom is at this stage going to be able to test the nuance of a vast amount of information more accurately than the fact-based approach can possibly do.
Yes, once you've got all the analysis, it's a kind of an input to the decision making. The board isn't just going to let ChatGPT decide the future direction of the company because of the forecasts it came up with. Naturally, you got to bring human judgment into that as well. And you've got to bring ethics because the algorithms, they can't exercise judgment. They can just come up with ideas and recommendations. And the rest is kind of up to us. I mean, I think one of the big benefits of generative AI is that it eliminates a lot of the mundane activities from our lives, so whether it's having to do a kind of a sales forecast or summarize a meeting, it just makes that a lot easier. So I think this idea of having a kind of a digital assistant or a co-pilot, Microsoft call it the co-pilot that they have in Teams, it can be a tremendous driver of productivity because, I mean, let's face it, nobody wants to do all those mundane activities. That's maybe the greatest benefit so far of AI is that it's a kind of a liberator of our time if used in the right way.
The greatest liberator of our time. That's a good thing. But there's a caveat. If used in the right way. According to Mark, when it comes to making decisions, there's no substitute at the moment for our human judgment. We are still essential to the process for our ethics, our instincts, our code. Plus, AI can do away with those mundane tasks that those lucky enough to be able to sit around boardroom tables or spend their time making podcasts, for example, really don't want to do. But a lot of those mundane tasks are currently being done by real human beings who have lives and need a livelihood. What happens to them?
The answer is that, unfortunately, we don't quite know, because if you ask economists, and sometimes they have a little bit of a paths answer, which is, oh, look at every technology throughout history, railroads, telephone. Yes, it caused some temporary unemployment. It had some dislocation effects in terms of jobs, but ultimately, because it drove productivity, it created lots of new activities. And overall, the economy grew and you had many more sort of jobs. And I think that is generally true for most of history. I don't think there's any evidence to kind of gainsay that. I think when it comes to AI, it's a bit more complex. There is a question, I think, about the longer term, because the kind of unique quality of AI, which is unlike any other technology in history, is that it gets better by itself. Right. So if you think about every other technology, I used to talk to my colleagues a lot about the steam engine, which is my kind of favorite example, but it got better because we as humans kept improving it, right, and finding new applications. But these algorithms, to a certain extent, they can train themselves, and the more data they get, the better they get. And that's different, right? Because that means that the algorithms are going to get better and better and better. And they're going to be able to do things that we didn't expect them to do. I mean, we didn't expect even 15 years ago that we'd have anything like ChatGPT or generative AI. We didn't think that, they could just automatically summon up business forecasts and kind of spreadsheets and do all of these types of activities. We didn't think that they could create poetry. You can go into ChatGPT and ask it, which I have done, create a poem in the style of W.B. Yeats. And it comes up with something that, isn't half bad. So there's a danger that I think we underestimate the long-term impact of technology. And that's why we just have to be very cautious, I think, in our approach. It is the case, I think, to be absolutely honest, that a lot of perhaps entry-level work may be eliminated. We are seeing that in areas like legal analysis, a lot of the entry-level legal work, it can be automated. Now, people may move on to other tasks or jobs, that's fine. But there is a risk, which is about the loss of expertise as well. Because, if we think about most of us, like our career progression, you go into a job, you learn the ropes, right? Initially you do a lot of the slog work, but you learn a lot from it. And that gives you experience and judgment that you build up and then you bring into your more senior roles. What happens when that entry level work is gone and you only have the higher level roles and people who haven't necessarily learned the ropes, who haven't accumulated that experience? So, as I say, I'm a little bit on the fence here. I think we do have to be cautious. And, maybe AI is different from every other technology because of its unique qualities.
I recall being at an education conference and an economist stood up and said, well, education is superfluous. Google knows everything. I don't need an education. I just ask Google. And my immediate response was, but how do you know what to ask? And if you're incapable of asking the right question, you're never going to get the appropriate answer out. And so, that risk of a loss of cognitive ability, perhaps, because we get lazy. We're all under pressure. We're expected to do more with less all the time. So therefore, we're going to use these tools. Will it undermine our long-term cognitive abilities?
Well, I think that's a risk, actually. And one of the things I talked about in the Harvard Business Review article is the loss of expertise currency. Well, one of the experts we actually talked to for the article, who is now involved in AI research, but he used to be a US Navy pilot. And he talked about it in the context of piloting a plane. It's like, well, yes, of course you've got the autopilot. And a lot of the time you are using the autopilot, but what he pointed out is that sometimes you have to turn off the autopilot and you have to land the plane yourself because you need to maintain that expertise currency. And I think we find it's the same. It's, when any kind of task, when it becomes automated, we become used to not doing it. And then you come back to it, maybe sort of a few months later, and you're kind of like, how do I do this again? You have to spend a little bit of time getting back into it. So I think that's a real risk. I think that the risk of losing certain skills, I mean, not that many people know how to write a letter now because everybody's using email. And I think it could be the same with our decision-making kind of faculties, that we could lose some of that.
So there is this world of opportunity that we have to learn. We can't control it, but manage, perhaps, in the process of seeking information to make us better decision makers.
We have to learn the basic skills. Part of learning the basic skills is understanding what kind of technologies are out there and how you use them properly and safely. So if people in university are, they're learning how to do economic research, so they go to use the internet, right? Because that's where the data is, and that's sort of fine. But I think it's different when it comes to tools that can short circuit the whole kind of process. You can't learn a skill by just having the technology doing it for you. And that's always been true, and it will remain true. And so I think in terms of education, we have to have an approach that recognizes the reality of these technologies, still teaches the basic skills, but then shows students, here's how you can use it in a responsible and effective way.
If you're enjoying this podcast, you might also enjoy the We Society. From education to the economy, the grand challenges facing our society remain as pressing as ever. Should we switch to a 4-day working week? Is education the key to social mobility? How can we unlock the productivity problem? That's why I'm recommending you give The We Society a listen. It's hosted by journalist and author Will Hutton, and each episode features expert guests sharing their big ideas for changing the way we live. Why not make The We Society your next listen? After this one, of course. Available now on Spotify, Apple, and all good podcast platforms. You can't learn a skill by having technology do it for you. So AI can enhance our chances of making the right decision by giving more information and ideas than we could ever have dreamed of. But it might also undermine it if it means we miss out on learning the basic processes of life. The world needs to make some important decisions about how this technology gets used. But there's a problem. A few episodes ago, we spoke to champion poker player Liv Bourrie about her art of deciding. She spoke specifically about the dangers of competition in the world of AI. In fact, her podcast, Win-Win, is all about that. Her contention is that competition leads to speed, and that's the last thing we need. Right now, we should be taking things slowly in order to make the right decisions about this technology. Mark is on the same page.
Certainly, there is a kind of an AI arms race, essentially between sort of China, the US, Europe is involved to some extent. I think sort of the danger is if we just think about AI as a technology, if we just think about it as something that drives economic growth or can produce endless sort of analysis, and if we put too much trust in it, that's where the danger lies. I mean, always we have to bring it back to humans, right? So if we're using the technology in a way that it helps humans and works with humans to improve how they operate, I think it will be okay. But if we see it as something that ultimately is replacing humans, then I think lots of dangers lie down that path, because machines don't have judgment. They don't have ethics. They don't have a sense of responsibility. They're not sentient, right? And probably they never will be. So whatever is coming out of the machine, we as humans have to be able to look at that and moderate it and take a judgment. But the fear is, will that happen? Because there's so many pressures, particularly on nations, to try to be at the top of the stack in terms of AI.
If we are asking machines to make some elementary decisions, make some elementary judgments, find the gaps, find the frauds, find the tax dodgers, whatever it might be, and we start losing those abilities, those human abilities ourselves, so we just want to do it for speed and efficiency, what are we learning from AI as to how it reflects us and what we ask it, what we tell it, what we put into it in this vast ocean of information that swirls about cyberspace all the time?
Well, what we're learning is that algorithms are heavily dependent, as you might expect, on the data that they're trained on. And here's the problem. There's a lot of bias in society. Humans are very biased in terms of how they make decisions. We often have a lot of unconscious biases. Organizations, because they've got a history, they often have organizational biases. And that creates risks. I mean, so one of the examples I often give where I see a lot of risks is in the use of AI for recruitment. The goal of the algorithms, in large part, is to find people who the company believes will be successful in the organization. But when you look at the people that are successful in the organization, in many cases, you'll find, they're all people, let's say, that have an Oxbridge background. Nothing against people with an Oxbridge background, but that then has certain connotations in terms of class, ethnicity, gender, background, and so on. So there's a real sort of danger that because we've only ever had people with an Oxbridge background, that then the algorithm begins to kind of mimic that. Now, a lot of the companies that provide these kind of services, they say, well, we've a very responsible approach to AI. We have all sorts of safeguards. And they do. But the point is that fundamentally, the algorithms are based on data and past data. And unless you have a very kind of stringent approach, there's a real danger of maybe a bias that is just very difficult to detect until, you've gone 4 or 5 years. And then you see, oh, well, it seems to be recruiting or recommending certain types of candidates, and we don't know why. So there really is no system that isn't biased. And the problem is that when you try and correct one type, you kind of correct another. It can become a bit of a fool's errand, really, to try and kind of eliminate all biases.
One thing that has come through very clearly in the series is humanity's reluctance to make big and difficult and complex decisions. Whether that be at a policy-making level, at a political level, at a business level, at a personal level, we tend to procrastinate on the difficult stuff. Can AI help us in this way?
It can help to some extent. It can help because it can get us the information that we need a lot faster. It can create scenarios, and AI, if used in the right way, can sort of model out those kind of scenarios. So that sort of helps, because otherwise that could take a lot of time to do that in a kind of a manual way. Where it isn't going to help is where the decision is one of values. You're having to trade off kind of different. There's going to be loads of decisions that policymakers will have. Do I use AI kind of weapons in a particular conflict, or do I sacrifice one small group of people because it will save many, many more lives? AI isn't going to help. It's great at taking a whole swathe of information and giving you options, but it can't resolve ethical sort of dilemmas. You can tell it what you think your definition of fairness is and to optimize for that. But if you've got 5 different definitions of fairness, it's not going to be able to tell you which one or resolve conflicts. And you can only do that as a human and live with the consequences. And that's not going to change anytime soon.
It's 2040, the 3 possible scenarios as to the bad, the probable, and the unlikely.
Well,
it's a terrible title for a film, but maybe we can work on that.
Yes, I mean, well, the good side of it, maybe from an economics perspective, is it could be a very efficient world, right? Because a lot of mundane type activities have been eliminated. And for a lot of people, that would be good because they can spend more of their time being creative. And it could be a world of fairly high economic growth as well, because the machines are very efficient and they drive a lot of processes. Life could be easier for a lot of people. I think the bad side of it will be where, potentially if you have a lot of job losses and a lot of displacement of work. So you could find increasing inequality, between those people who have the kind of super skills, the kind of very creatives who are still somewhat in demand, but you have a growing underclass, if you like, of people with much lower level skills who essentially have been kind of hollowed out. And that's creating all sorts of tensions in society. And also kind of inequality in access to the technology. So there's an advantage come to those who have the best algorithm and can afford access to the best algorithm, whereas those who don't have access kind of sliding down the societal scale. And I think really dystopian side of it would be where essentially the machines are in control, which I don't think is going to necessarily happen by 2040, where they're making a lot of decisions, where you're losing all sense of ethics and values. People question their humanity because they've actually lost a lot of the skills that they needed in order to make judgments. And there are real dislocations in society. I don't think we're going to end up in that world, thankfully, anytime soon, but there could well be sort of elements of it kind of appearing.
Am I mad to insist that my children say please and thank you to Siri and Alexa and other inanimate robotic assistants?
No, I don't think you're bad. To a certain extent, how we interact with AI can influence how we interact with humans, right? There's a danger that as more of the AI takes on a human form, and certainly a lot of virtual assistants or bots, they have human form when you interact with them, then we begin to see those as servants, kind of servitors, that are there just to help us and just to work for us. If we start becoming impatient and just barking out orders to the machine, I think we'll see that very quickly that behavior will then carry over to humans as well. And it isn't helped by the fact that increasingly the AI systems are human-like, but also as they get better, it becomes harder to distinguish a virtual sort of agent that you're on the phone to from a real life. Well, maybe you can figure it out after maybe half a minute, but initially, you're not sure, So this is a problem that it won't always be obvious. And that's why we have to retain our ability to make that distinction and remembering our basic humanity and how to interact with people, I think is going to be really important.
Remembering your basic humanity can never not be important. There is no doubt that artificial intelligence can help us make decisions. It can probably help us make better decisions. But, says Mark Purdy, we have to be careful. We have to understand that bias can creep in anywhere. And remember, the information that ChatGPT is trawling came from a human being at one stage with all of their preconceptions and preferences. We can't allow it to devalue our expertise currency. We have to know how to land our planes in real life, and most importantly, we are the ones with the judgment, the ethics, the instincts that no machine can replicate. Mark Purdy's Art of Deciding, about the way we use artificial intelligence today and into the future. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Art of Deciding. You'll find us on all of the major podcast platforms, so please click follow so that you don't miss an episode. If you've enjoyed Mark, you might also be interested in the former chair of the Bank of England, Sir Brad Freed, the Cobra Beer founder, Lord Karen Billamoria, or beauty entrepreneur and tech innovator, Sharmadean Reed. Go and check out these Arts of Deciding, and please give us a rating and leave a review. Even better, share this link far and wide with anybody who needs to make a decision, which is everyone in your address book. I'm Bruce Whitfield. You can find out more about me on brucewhitfield.com. Until the next time, bye-bye.